in B'nai Brith Canada's series of debates for the upcoming federal election on April 28th, this time in the riding of York Centre here in Toronto. We've got a head-to-head matchup between the candidates of the two leading parties, Ms. Yara Sachs for the Liberal Party of Canada and Roman Baber for the Conservative Party of Canada. And I'll be doing, of course, a more detailed introduction later on in my remarks. First of all, I want to give a huge thank you to David Gronowski, the Director of Government Relations here at B'nai Brith Canada, and the rest of his team for putting this together. An incredibly important service for many in our Canadian Jewish community and other communities across the country and here in York Centre who are tuning in tonight. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning in tonight and being such a great audience. I'm going to introduce the format here tonight. So after I finish my introductory remarks, we'll have opening statements of 5 minutes each from each of the candidates. And then we'll move into a section of 5 questions, which have been pre-selected by B'nai Brith Canada, and that focus on issues of importance to the Canadian Jewish community and issues of national security. There will be 5 of those. Each candidate will get 3 minutes to answer each question, and then a brief 1-minute rebuttal. We're also going to open the floor after that to members of our wonderful audience to pose questions. If you have questions right now or you think about them later in the debate, please send a message in the chat to the B'nai Brith Questions account, which hopefully will appear somewhere at the top of your screen. Please try to make sure they're questions that are open to both of the candidates and not directed solely towards one of the candidates, so they can both answer. And then once we do audience questions, there will be closing statements of 3.5 minutes each from both of the candidates, and then 5 minutes of closing remarks by myself just to wrap this all up. I also want to add that the NDP candidate for York Centre, Yusuf Sinan Ulukan Ligil, was invited to participate in this event. He was not available, so he's not here, in case anyone is wondering about that. Before I move on to reading the formal introductions for the candidates, I just want to add on a personal note how much this event reminds me and makes me miss the late CEO of B'nai Brith, Michael Mostyn, Zichrono Livracha, who was a great mentor to me and many at B'nai Brith and many in the Jewish community at large. And there's also a very important personal connection because Michael actually stood for election twice federally in this very riding in York Centre and once provincially as well. I moderated a number of these debates with him back when I worked at B'nai Brith Canada, and he had many great stories to tell about participating in these debates himself as a candidate. So as we say in Judaism, sometimes when people study Torah or when people do a good deed, they say, may it be for the elevation of the soul of someone who is departed. So I say on this occasion, as we host this important debate, may it be le'ilui nishmat Michael Mostyn. So without further ado, I will read the formal introductions of the candidates, and keep in mind, B'nai Brith Canada did not write these introductions. These are what we received from the campaigns themselves. So we'll begin with the incumbent. The Honourable Yara Sachs was first elected as the Member of Parliament for York Centre in 2020. She recently served as Canada's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. Yara is a longtime community advocate and leader focused on promoting health and addressing inequalities in society. Having held advisory roles in policy, communications, and project management, and with experience working in the office of the Mayor of Jerusalem and on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, she brings a Canadian and global perspective to her community engagement work. Before entering politics, she was a successful small business owner and the director of trauma practice for Healthy Communities, a Toronto-based mental health charity working for better access to mental health services. It has been her honor to represent York Centre and advocate in Ottawa for stronger, more affordable, healthier communities. She'll continue to bring forward these priorities and all those of York Centre as your Member of Parliament. And then we have the Conservative candidate, Roman Baber. Roman Baber served York Centre in the provincial parliament from 2018 to 2022. He always put his constituents first, most notably for children with autism and in favor of a balanced public health response at a great personal cost. Roman is passionate about Canada's democracy and preserving economic opportunity for the next generation of Canadians. He is known for saying what he believes and doing what he believes is right. Roman immigrated to Canada at age 15 and settled directly at Shepherd and Bathurst. He attended high school at W.L. Mackenzie, obtained a BA from York University, and graduated law school at the University of Western Ontario. Roman was called to the Ontario Bar in 2006 and practiced civil and commercial litigation until his provincial election in 2018. Roman resides in Bathurst Manor and practices commercial and public interest litigation. He is a big fan of the Toronto Raptors and boxes in his spare time. One final housekeeping note before I start with the questions. As each candidate gets down to the end of their allotted time, to 10 seconds left, I will do my best, if my stopwatch on my iPhone cooperates, to give a 10-second warning just like this. And then after that, to keep things rolling, I may have to cut off candidates, although I certainly don't hope to do that. So without further ado, we will start with the prepared questions for this evening. And on the basis of a coin flip, questions 1, 3, and 5 will be going to Ms. Sachs first, and then questions 2 and 4 will be going to Mr. Baber first. So the first question tonight for the candidates is, if elected, what changes to the oh, sorry, I've forgotten about opening statements. I was too eager to get into the into my role. So yes, let's begin first with
get us to answer questions. It's all good.
Exactly. Want to get the substance. But first we have opening statements, and for this I'm told that Mr. Baber is going first for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Aidan, and good evening. I'm Roman Baber, running to represent you in Parliament on behalf of the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm grateful to B'nai Brith, the moderator, and to my opponent. I'd like to wish all of you a Chag Sameach and a happy Passover. May this holiday free us from whatever holds us back, and may we be happy and healthy and prosperous. And may all the hostages return in time for the Memuna, and may we spend next year in Jerusalem, hopefully on an Israeli delegation with Prime Minister Polyev. To B'nai Brith, on a personal note, I extend my sincerest condolences on the passing of Michael Mostyn. Michael was an exceptional individual and a wonderful advocate. In fact, he ran for this very York Centre seat in 2004 and 2006. He made a remarkable contribution to our community and our country, and may his memory be a blessing. I want to begin by telling you a little bit about myself and what brought me here. Like so many of us on this call, I'm an immigrant in Canada. I was born in the Soviet Union, and we escaped communism when I was 8. We then lived in Israel, and when I was 15, on September 15th, 1995, we moved to Canada, directly to Shepherd and Bathurst, to Canyon Avenue in the heart of York Centre. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was in the middle of the night. I looked out the window, and I saw Earl Bales Park and the Dawnlands. And directly across from the park, Yonge Street, lights and towers, Yonge Street. And I was in love from day one. And we didn't have a cent to our name. And I remember what true poverty was like. My dad sold ice cream on those yellow bicycles. My mom was an unemployed teacher. But I've always had a job. And I've always had this incredible joy because it didn't really matter. Because in Canada, you don't really need much because you have Canadian opportunity. And that's the Canadian promise, that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. The city, this province, this country has given me every opportunity, and to so many of us, every opportunity to study, to work, to succeed. Because all you had to do to succeed in Canada is just work hard and be nice to people. Such a wonderful thing. I'm Exhibit A for the Canadian dream, for the Canadian promise, and that is the reason why I'm here. Because after the last Liberal decade, the Canadian promise is in jeopardy. I'm not sure I can tell a 15-year-old boy or girl today that they can enjoy the same Canadian promise that I did. We never felt the type of pressures we're experiencing now, and our future is at stake. When I knock on a house door, people tell me that they can't afford their mortgage. When I knock on a rental building, people tell me, Roman, I can't afford my rent. Most young people believe that they will never own a home. Crime and chaos are running wild. Canadians no longer feel safe. 50,000 Canadians died from overdose in the last 9 years. We're polarized and divided more than ever before. But I'm determined. In fact, I'm optimistic that with a conservative government, better days are ahead. That we can and we will, in fact, bring Canada back to the country we know and love. Our common sense conservative plan is simple but detailed. We will cut federal income tax by 15%. We will axe the sales tax on new homes. We will bring in zero capital gains tax when you reinvest your capital gain in Canada. You will defer it. We will break dependence on the United States with a natural energy corridor, pipelines, projects, the works. We're going to build Canadian oil and gas to create more customers and make Canada sovereign, independent, and the wealthy nation that we should be. We're going to get tough on crime and end liberal catch and release policies. The revolving door has to end. We're going to give criminals jail, not bail, with serious sentencing and bail reform. And we will end the funding of the drug injection sites that my opponent loves so much. And we will end the self-supply of opioids that she loves to pay for, that are resold on the streets to finance fentanyl, heroin, and crime. We will fix the broken immigration policies by limiting immigration to under what we can grow in healthcare and housing to bring back the Canada we know and love. I'm grateful for being here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have a discussion, especially with those of you who are undecided. I sincerely hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. We'll now have introductory remarks from Ms. Sachs.
Thank you so much, Aidan. And a special thanks to David Gronofsky and the B'nai Brith team. Having gatherings like this are so important and bring transparency and real discussion in our democratic process. Moadim lesimcha to everyone who is celebrating, and Chag Sameach. I would be remiss if I didn't say this Passover, like the Passover before, is one where we celebrate, but we also reflect on who is not at our table this year and who is not with their families, and the 24 hostages that we know to be alive, and also the 59 souls who are not connected with their families. We take pause, but we also know that we need to come together because this is who we are as a community. Aidan, I really appreciate your comments about Michael Mawson. He was a wonderful friend and ally to this community and to the work that we do in our constituency teams, and really the heart and soul of B'nai Brith advocacy up in Ottawa. And really his legacy continues with all of you. So the work that you do at B'nai Brith, and so many of us have been advocating for, is never more important than now. In a time when anti-Semitism here in Canada and around the world has been the highest that we have seen, certainly in my lifetime. And as the mother of 2 daughters right here in York Center, as an Israeli Canadian, and as a member of this community, it's something that I struggle with as a parent, and also something that I fight for as a member of parliament every single day. This is a consequential election for a country where we have to stand up for Canada and Canadian values. But make no mistake, Canadian values are also Jewish values, where dignity, equality, and safety are hallmarks of our democracy and of our charter, and where freedom to worship and practice your faith and embrace your culture and identity as part of the incredible mosaic and fabric of Canada's diversity is both our strength, but something that should be both cherished and protected, always. The Jewish community cannot and should not have to combat anti-Semitism alone, and there should be support from every corner of Canada. Because let me be clear, hate is not a partisan issue, and it should not be weaponized by any group or any political party. I chose to stand up and represent York Centre in September 2020 as a mom in the middle of the pandemic, when uncertainty and fear in the face of a global health crisis meant that we needed to be there for each other, to be there for our neighbors, to keep our loved ones and seniors safe and our most vulnerable. And we had to ensure that we got through it together and protected our community. And with that drive, I've advocated for and fought for this community every single day since. As the government and the first jurisdiction in Canada to formally adopt IHRA in 2019, I advocated in the fall of 2020, immediately after being elected, that we go further than just adopting the definition, to create a government handbook that would be the resource and tool to unequivocally allow for anti-Semitism to be identified and actions of hate against the Jewish community to be able to be enforced with clarity. I know that hateful anti-Semitism through the global terrorist entities and their proxies here in our communities and on our university campuses have had a horrific impact on our young people particularly. That's why I advocated and signed the order in council as minister to list Samidoun as a terrorist organization in Canada alongside the United States. As a mother in this community, I have and will always advocate for women, for their health and for their safety. Standing up for the right to choose, sexual health and reproductive rights, they go hand in hand alongside making sure that things like breast cancer screening guidelines meet the needs of women in every jurisdiction. I was honored to work with constituents right here in York Centre to move the needle for women to be able to be informed and advocate for accessible and equitable screening at the age of 40, not 50, something that others had tried to do and failed. I'm also proud to have been the lead member in getting Kira's law passed as a private member's bill in 2023, because keeping women and children safe from intimate partner violence means knowing not just the physical signs, but the signs of silent suffering. We made sure that judges were better equipped to know how to protect women, to offer electronic monitoring when needed, and to keep women safe when they're at their most vulnerable in leaving a violent partner. I made sure they had the protections that they needed. To the audience, I say, and to residents in York Centre, this is what hard work looks like. Advocating relentlessly for the things that matter to get the results and actions that you expect us to deliver. It's been an honor and pleasure to serve this community, both as a parent, as a member of this community. And we've done this together. We've never taken on issues alone. And I'm here to share our thoughts tonight and earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on. Now, I was overeager before, but now we'll really move on to the questions prepared ahead of time. The first question that'll go to Ms. Sachs first is, if elected, what changes to the criminal code will you and your party make to better fight hate crimes and help law enforcement stop them? And as a reminder, each of the candidates will have 3 minutes for the question and then a 1-minute rebuttal. So we'll start with Ms. Sachs again.
Thank you, Aidan, for the question. So let me start by saying that no one in Canada should ever feel unsafe to express their faith, and to say that Jewish Canadian safety is not conditional. As I said in my opening remarks, Jewish values are Canadian values, and Canada has been a friend to the Jewish community and also an ally to Israel, but we know the deep connection between the two. We know about the alarming rise of anti-Semitism here in York Centre. We see it every weekend at the corner of Bathurst and Shepherd. And I will say this, that the lack of leadership by premiers, provincial attorney generals, and mayors in protecting the Jewish communities across the country has been an abandonment of their responsibilities to keep every community in their jurisdiction safe. And for that, that's why I've supported and continue to support bubble legislation to protect community spaces. And I've spoken clearly and resolutely about this to say that hate propaganda is not freedom of expression and should never stand. This is the work that we did alongside Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism and draft legislation, presenting it to the Justice Minister at the time, and making those commitments at the Anti-Semitism Forum just last month in March. But we need to go further than that. In addition to supporting the bubble legislation, I've spoken with JSN and with others, including UJA, to talk about the alignment of our legislation to ban the displaying of glorification of terrorist symbols in line with our terrorist listings. The criminal code should be in line with what we have listed as terrorist organizations, including Samidoun, Hezbollah, and Hamas, which we listed in 2002. It makes sense and it should be done. But we need to amend the criminal code to make sure that there's blocked access of these protests to shuls and schools and community centers. We need to make sure that any intimidation or threat to those communities or their services there is a crime. We need to enforce stricter bail laws on violent crime, especially for repeat offenders. But alongside this, we need to make sure that our community security programs such as the SIPs meet the needs of the community, whether it's increasing funding for security guards and for training, and making sure that communities have the supports that they need. The reality is this: 4% of the GTA are members of the Jewish community, yet 40% of the hate crimes in the GTA are directed at the Jewish community. I've never been silent and have attended with Beis Chaim Mushka at town halls, and as a matter of fact, Roman's been at some of them with me, where we've heard from constituents about the real fear in this community. I have, alongside members of parliament such as Marco Mendicino and Anthony Housefather, fought for Bible legislation, which Prime Minister Carney committed to just last week. The work needs to be done at all levels of government, working together, because the Jewish community cannot do this alone.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Mr. Baber.
Thank you. The question was amendments to the criminal code. So my heart breaks for what is happening to Canada's Jewish community. Hate rallies, fire bombings, vandalism, the shooting up of a Jewish school just a kilometer away from where I'm sitting, not once, but 3 times. Some members of our community are afraid to wear a kippah or keep a mezuzah on their home. Doctors are being bullied and harassed. A completely hostile environment in schools and universities. This is shameful and all allowed to foster under this Liberal government. Under this government, hate crimes increased by 250% since 2015. And specifically, anti-Semitic hate crimes more than quadrupled. They're 407% up. Now, to protect Canada's Jewish community, Conservative government will take some very concrete steps. First, we'll increase sentences for mischief-related offensive, specifically for religious properties, and pass new laws to protect worship, places of worship, and those that attend them. 2, we will increase penalties for the current law that bans the wearing of mask during a riot or unlawful assembly. And we'll go further. We're going to ensure that it applies to all possible offenses. I've always been of the view that if we were able to deal with the masks, with the face coverings, then so many of demonstrations and so many of those cowards that show up and terrorize our streets, that many of them will be afraid and they will fizzle. So we got to look at the ability to limit at the face covers. We will deport. Pierre has been clear about this. We will deport from Canada any temporary resident that is on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil. That's Conservative policy. But personally, I will go further, and that is to advocate to restore Bill C-51. Under Stephen Harper, it was illegal to promote or glorify terrorism. So glorification of Hamas or Sinwar at the corner of Shepherd and Bathurst, that would have been illegal. But of course, the Trudeau government repealed it in 2017. They changed it to an offense to be counseling terrorism. I will fight day and night to bring it back. Okay, and finally, a Conservative government led by Pierre Poilievre will set a new tone that we expect all of Canada's law enforcement services to enforce the criminal code. We'll expect zero tolerance approach where it comes to threats, intimidation, and harassment of Jewish communities. We will put an end to this lawlessness. You can count on us for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have a 1-minute response from Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Aidan. And what I'll say is this. As a former MPP and a lawyer, my Conservative counterpart should know that we already have legislation for hate crimes, mischief, incitement in the criminal code, as well as masking. They are illegal. In terms of the protests that are happening on our streets, they're already illegal at the municipal level if they don't have a permit. The issue here has been, time and again, a lack of leadership by provincial premiers, attorney generals, and police forces who have come to us as experts through the Anti-Semitism Forum and told us what resources they need. Experts, not opinions, not outrage, but really a deep understanding of what is happening. The Attorney General here in Ontario has over 30 cases on his docket of hate crimes that he hasn't prosecuted, and we have stood firmly in making sure that they need to meet the moment with responsibilities that they have.
Okay, and Mr. Baber for 1 minute.
Sure, absolutely. As a lawyer, I'll say that the masking laws are very limited in that they only apply to riots and unlawful assemblies, two definitions that are very difficult to meet under the criminal code. We will look to potentially apply to other offenses. Second, with respect to hate laws, regretfully, those are vague. They require the consent of the Attorney General. And what ends up happening is exactly what you saw earlier during Ms. Sachs's answer, where all levels of government are pointing the finger at each other. I've never done that in my career. We're going to look to see how we can streamline the criminal code. And the best thing we can do is we can undo what Justin Trudeau did when he repealed Bill C-51, which promoted terrorism, which glorified terrorism, which would have been wide enough to capture exactly what we're seeing on Canada's streets. And it's unfortunate that my rebuttal time is over, and I'm unable to go into the Liberal record on what has happened in the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, which will go first to Mr. Baber. If elected, what steps will you and your party take to list all terrorist organizations, along with individuals and entities that belong to them, that endanger the lives of Canadians and individuals around the world?
Absolutely. Well, you know, the Conservatives led the charge with respect to the listing of the IRGC, the Samidoun, and the Houthis as a terrorist organization. And we will not hesitate to list others when they're identified. We will also direct all government departments to ensure that these groups are treated, the listed groups, are in particular Samidoun, are treated as terrorists, as opposed to be given a charitable status under the Liberals. And we will immediately expel any and all terrorist-linked thugs and those associated with the Iranian regime. Now, for years, the Liberals refused and denied our calls to list the IRGC as a terrorist entity. That's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And this is even after the downing of Flight 752 over Tehran. But when did the Liberals finally list the IRGC as a terrorist entity? 3 days before the St. Paul's by-election, when they realized that they may lose Toronto-St. Paul because of the Jewish vote, because we know that, you know, as Melanie Joly said, have you seen the ethnic makeup of my riding? Literally 3 days before the St. Paul's by-election, they finally banned the IRGC. Can you imagine how much money the IRGC raised in Canada for Hezbollah under this Liberal government, under Minister Sachs? But finally, they came around. That's how they treat us when they need our vote. You see, Liberals don't care about the Jewish community. They don't care about terrorist financing. They care about politics only. Pierre Poilievre took a principled stand on day one to stand with the Jewish community. Whether it brings votes, whether it's more votes or less votes, doesn't matter. Conservatives have always stood on principle, and we always will. And finally on this, particularly in Canada, in Toronto and Vancouver, they have become havens for money laundering, not just for drugs, but also for terrorism. I will urge Prime Minister Poilievre to do a very serious review of all of our AML legislation, that's anti-money laundering legislation. Okay, our financial institutions are used by hostile foreign actors to launder dollars towards terrorism, towards hateful activity, and the Conservatives will put an end to it.
Thank you. Now over to Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Aidan, and thank you for this important question. So I'm pleased to say that I'm already running on a record of listing terrorist organizations and making sure our security services have the resources that they need to do their jobs. And to just be clear, it was a Liberal government that listed Hamas and Hezbollah in 2002, the Houthis and Samidoun and the IRGC in 2024, not because of political pressure, but because of good shared intelligence with our allied partners. These issues of listing terrorist organizations and intelligence collecting should never be politicized. And as my Conservative counterpart should know, you need the security clearance to know what you need to know the true global threats are, how they're manufactured, and where the threats truly stand. I know this because I personally signed the order in council designating Samidoun as a terrorist entity without hesitation and after tremendous advocacy, both before I was in cabinet and while I was in cabinet. And I will always support the strengthening of our intelligence and security agencies so that they do work with our allies to combat terrorism, because it is a global issue, not just a made in Canada one. If we're going to list terrorist groups and prosecute terrorist offensives, we need to have the right intelligence. It is this government that set up the NSICOP committee, an internal committee that has all members of all parties and senators as part of a closed, secure process to review and understand the true security threats that Canada faces each and every day. Pierre Poilievre has refused and continues to refuse to even get his security clearance on his own leadership campaign and how it was risked by foreign interference, to understand what the risks truly are. How do we expect a Conservative government to protect Canadians when they won't get the proper clearance? So rather than politicizing this process, let's look at national security for what it really is. It's not a game. It should be treated with the utmost seriousness, because that is what Canadians expect of us. That's what the Jewish community expects of us. We know that the spread of hatred has torn into the fabric of Canada, and I will always support actions that make our community safer, whether it's through tools and resources such as the IHRA handbook or the listing of terrorist activities. Because domestic threats aren't only coming from external sources. They come from people like Jeremy McKenzie and alt-right extremist groups who Pierre Poilievre stood with proudly, who the Conservative candidate stood with proudly in the convoy in Ottawa while they waved swastikas. If you get your security clearance, if you understand where the money flows, including $53,000 to your own leadership campaign, that is reckless. Understanding the importance of our security intelligence in this country and how it impacts communities means being responsible. I don't see that level of responsibility from the candidate or from Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives.
Okay, now I'll go back to Mr. Weber for a minute.
So I believe that was a very long minute. And so I asked to kindly be matched with equal time to what my opponent just had. So the IHRA was not able to explain why for a decade and 5 years after the downing of 752, the Liberals refused to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It didn't take no intelligence, and it certainly didn't take any classified intelligence to find out that it is her current boss, new boss, same much like the old boss, who's actually getting foreign interference right now from Beijing. So I think we ought to be really careful when we talk about foreign interference in favor of leadership candidates. And by the way, got foreign interference from Beijing against the foreign finance minister. Well, I see that regretfully my time is up. Aidan, I kindly ask that you entertain an additional minute or two in view of the fact that the clock was missed on Ms. Sachs.
So let me just jump in there for a second, and the B'nai Brith people can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the way the timing is supposed to work for these questions is that they're each posed to one of the candidates first, and that's alternating, and they get 3 minutes. And then for each of them, the other candidate gets 3 minutes, and then 1 minute back to the person who answered first, and then 1 minute back to the person who answered second. If that wasn't clear ahead of time, that would be my mistake, but I think we have the timing more or less correct. And I think, unless I messaged and told that I'm wrong about this, that Ms. Sachs gets 1 more minute on this topic, and then we'll move to the next one. Does that make sense with everyone? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I know there's a lot to say about that topic. It's an exciting topic. So 1 minute for Ms. Sachs to respond.
Thank you for the allotted 1 minute time after my allotted 3 minute time. It's good when we can keep pace with the discussion. It's really expected that elected officials are responsible in their information and not spreading misinformation and disinformation and conspiracy theories. We have been unequivocally clear that security intelligence, whether it is the bipartisan Hogue Commission and its recommendations that we followed, including Bill C-70, to protect from foreign interference, and other work that needs to be done. Again, this should not be a partisan issue. It should not be politicized. Mark Carney has been very clear about that it is the utmost importance that all candidates, leadership candidates, and all members and ministers, myself included, who had security and clearance, have it so that we can be well informed in our decisions. Terrorist entities cannot influence our work here. We need to protect Canadians and do it every step of the way with intelligence and security services. Thank you.
Thanks. So before we move on to the third question, just a very brief housekeeping reminder. I know many members of the audience are eager and have great questions, and some of you have been messaging them directly to me in the chat. I love reading them, but the ideal way to do this is if you send them to the B'nai Brith questions account using the drop-down arrow, and they'll collect them and send them out for questions. So our third prepared question, and this one will be Ms. Sachs first for 3 minutes, then Ms. Weber for 3 minutes, and then each again for 1 minute, is if elected, how will you and your party tackle foreign interference, improve immigration policies, and prevent the spread of extremist ideas to keep Canadians safe and protect Canadian values?
Thank you, Aidan, for this important question. And just so Roman's clear that it's 3 minutes now. So I think I want to get to the heart of this matter because I know this is what it really is, the burning question for the Jewish community underlying that question, and that's the Gaza temporary resident visa. So let's start there, because I've heard from so many of you, so many constituents about their concerns about who is coming to Canada from Gaza. So I want to be clear that every single application that was received underwent the same thorough security screening that all immigration applicants go through. But there was an added layer to this, because it's important to understand that Israel has the final say on every application that was presented to them of anyone leaving Gaza through COGAT. And for those who don't know what COGAT is, it's the coordinating organization for Gaza and the territories that includes 3 security networks. Its coordination of security is done by Israel, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority. So just to be clear again, Israel has the final say on any application of a Gaza applicant who wish to be with family members, either PR or citizens here in Canada. And also, we also did a track for Israelis during that time through the TRV that brought 8,300 Israelis to seek safe harbor here. And I was proud to advocate for them there and their ability to be here. So when we talk about foreign interference and foreign influence, we also have to talk about misinformation and disinformation, because it really is the biggest threat to our democracy right now. And we see it proliferating on social media platforms, and we're flooded with it almost every single day. And a lot of it is coming from regimes and organizations that are trying to taint the strength of our open and fair democracy here in Canada. And that includes organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. And we know it's an issue, and how we approach it must be informed, working with our allies, and making sure that the right intelligence is in place, because we have that responsibility, not just to Canadians, but to our communities. And it's essential as citizens and elected officials and governments that we're informed and can take action. But that means, like I said before, getting the security clearance so that you know that what you're talking about instead of refusing to do so that you can pass legislation by bill like Bill C-70, so that we can have informed immigration decisions, just like the lowering the levels we did to 45% just last year. And in place now is Minister Rachel Bendayan, a member of the community herself, who knows firsthand how sensitive this issue is to the Jewish community. This is about keeping the integrity of our immigration system while being vigilant in our security and intelligence to be sure that everyone is treated fairly, but with the utmost of scrutiny. That hasn't been the case that we've seen with Conservatives. We will continue to be transparent and understand that, like with Bill C-70 and the NSICOP, that we can ensure that we have a foreign agents registry, disrupt foreign interference, and modernize CSIS.
Thank you. And now over to Mr. Weber for 3 minutes.
Thank you. After a decade of the Liberals, Canada is more vulnerable to foreign interference more than ever. Hostile regimes, especially in Beijing, are actively interfering in our democracy. They've targeted and harassed our citizens, and they target our elections. This Liberal government allowed multiple ISIS terrorists into Canada, including a man who allegedly filmed mutilating a live person in the Middle East. The same man charged with planning a terrorist attack in Canada. The Liberals have lost all control over our immigration system. The government actually admits that it lost count of the number of people that are in Canada illegally. One government report estimates that it's somewhere between 20,000 to 500,000 people that this government lost track of. Talk about security threats. Conservative government will put an end to foreign interference in our country and protect Canadians. And here's how we'll do it. We'll immediately implement a foreign agent registry. This law passed in May 2024, and the Liberals have not moved on a foreign agent registry. We will. We will add another 2,000 border agents. We'll extend CBSA powers over the entire border, not just the crossings. We'll use border surveillance. We'll improve monitoring system. We'll install scanners at all our major land crossing and ports. And we will expel foreign agents from Canada. We'll also say that we will deport from our country any temporary resident that is on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil. We'll have zero tolerance for any foreign interference with our election. Now, Beijing has been running wild here with the Liberals, and Pierre will put an end to it. But now I must ask, because we have a major development in this election and something odd is going on with Mark Carney vis-a-vis China. Okay, just last week, we learned that Beijing was actively promoting Carney on WeChat. Carney met with a pro-Beijing group only to lie about it until pictures of it surfaced that afternoon. There's clear foreign interference in this election by China, benefiting the Liberals, and Mark Carney says he has absolutely no idea why. I would like to ask Yara Sachs, why is Beijing interfering in our elections to help Mark Carney? Because you see, for years, Mark Carney called for more global dominance by China and for China to take center stage in global affairs. He praised China's leadership on climate change, which is laughable because China is putting online a dirty coal plant at least every week. Okay, Carney actually indirectly invested in Chinese coal. He praised China's unique deployment of AI technologies, saying that we can learn from their deployment. I'm actually very frightened by that, and especially Chinese surveillance systems. And now, shamefully, Carney continues to show bad judgment, or maybe intent, by turning a blind eye to Chinese interference, and an MP who actually called for a bounty to be executed on a Conservative candidate. That's Carney's idea of accountability. The Liberals allowed for this to foster. They have to be held accountable. And I'd like an answer. Why is Mark Carney getting help from Beijing?
Okay, well, we'll have 1 minute for Ms. Sachs to answer.
Thank you, Aidan. And, you know, I've asked this before and I'll ask again, why has Pierre Poilievre not gotten his security clearance when he was told clearly by nonpartisan security intelligence forces here in Canada that India had a direct involvement, the Indian government had an involvement in his leadership race, which the Conservative candidate also ran in a failed bid. But let's talk about the impact of misinformation and disinformation when it's used recklessly by politicians in federal elections, just like we heard from my Conservative candidate just right now espousing conspiracy theories that are unfounded. We need to be responsible. We need to be careful and thoughtful. We need to listen to experts, whether they are in security intelligence or healthcare experts. But we have a leader who won't protect himself, his party, or Canadians. And we have a Conservative candidate here in the riding who spouted anti-vaccination conspiracy theories and continues to do so about Beijing. It's highly disappointing, and York Centre deserves better.
Okay, for 1 minute, back to Mr. Baber.
I'm vaccinated myself, Ms. Sachs, and I'm not sure why you'd be calling me names. I'm also not sure why you deem a mainstream media story where Beijing helped Mark Carney by WeChat last week, something Mark Carney in a press conference the next day said he has no idea why you call that misinformation and disinformation. Is that your idea of what you're going to censor? When people talk about what's happening in our election right now, even mainstream media stories, you deem that to be misinformation and disinformation. In other words, you intend to censor me when there's a fair accusation levied at Mr. Carney. Let's look at Mr. Carney throughout this race. He saw it fit to keep the candidate that wanted a bounty on a Conservative candidate. He replaced him with another Chinese Beijing sympathizer. For the last decade, the Chinese have been running police stations in the GTA in Montreal, harassing and threatening Chinese Canadians. Nothing has been done about it, and you're certainly not going to do anything about it other than accuse people of saying things you disagree with.
Thank you. Quick note for people who are still trying to figure out how to ask questions in the best manner. If you go to the chat function in the bottom right of your screen, you'll see there's a little blue box with an arrow. If you click that, and then it'll go down to B'nai Brith questions. That's how you send questions directly to B'nai Brith questions. So now we'll move on to our fourth prepared question. This time, Mr. Baber will answer first. The question is, if elected, what steps will you and your party take to ban hate rallies that support terrorist entities and sanctioned regimes?
Thank you. I welcome that question because long before this race, I actually introduced legislation at Queen's Park, Bill 84, to ban Al-Quds rallies from the ground of Queen's Park. It passed second reading, and I'm very proud of that. If I had to go back in time, what we need to try and do is ban or insist on enforcement of rallies that incite violence. It's easier legislatively and probably constitutionally. You know, I grew up in Israel during the first Intifada, and now there are people outside literally yelling for Intifada, for violent resistance, and that's already illegal. And I'm dismayed that the law is not being enforced by local police. And maybe the federal government has a role here because criminal code is a federal piece of legislation and it is the law of the land. So maybe the Toronto police and Olivia Chow need to evaluate what they're doing here. But regardless, conservatives will strengthen the criminal code to deal with these hateful rallies. So first of all, we'll increase penalties for the current law that bans the wearing of masks. But most importantly, we'll look at a way to apply that law more widely so we can catch more illegal behavior. Again, once these cowards take off the masks, I think a lot of them will fizzle. We will deport anyone who engages in violence or hate crimes who is not a permanent resident. That's already policy. And as I said, I will do everything I can to bring back Bill 51 that Trudeau repealed so that promotion and glorification of terrorism become illegal again. This will provide much needed clarity for law enforcement. It'll bring clarity and allow us to get around some of the issues that amount to political football between lawyers, no pun intended, Aiden, when we talk about the Attorney General having to lay charges first or the Attorney General points their finger at the police. No. We got to work this out. You know, I lived in Bathurst Manor until a short time ago. I moved back to the condos at Allen Road and Shepherd after the Walk for Israel last year. I turned on Kodzell. I was without any staff and sure without any security. And a bunch of thugs approached me. It was the truck with the effigy in the back of the truck with a body. And they accused me of genocide. They called me all sorts of unflattering names. And then they did another round. This is in my home where I lived in Bathurst Manor. This is what Jewish Canadians have now come to expect living in Canada, but that doesn't need to be the case because we're not going to peddle for votes. We're not going to look up at the ethnic makeup of our ridings like Melanie Joly does. The Conservatives will stand with the Jewish community, whether it's right or wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Now over to Ms. Sachs for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Aiden. Let me be clear about something, that hate propaganda is not free speech and cannot be tolerated. And I've been vocal about this time and again, whether it was after the incident on University Avenue in front of Mount Sinai Hospital or at the many gatherings that I've had in roundtable discussions with constituents. Whether it's Hamas flags, Hezbollah flags, cosplays wearing Sinwar people, and hate speech that we've heard at really the protests that are certainly not peaceful, we know for sure this is intimidation, it's hate speech, and it cannot stand. But I do want to go back to my point earlier about jurisdiction, and my Conservative counterpart seems to understand that provincially this is where the jurisdiction lies. It's good to see that, because at the federal level, we've done the work. We've criminalized Holocaust denial, we've criminalized hate speech, things like mischief and concealing your identity and unlawful assembly. The penalties can certainly be increased, and I said that in my opening remarks to the first question. But we also need to make sure that law enforcement and prosecutors have the tools to do their jobs. It's provincial prosecutors who need to recommend the charges and carry out the prosecutions. And it's the provincial attorney general that can approve hate speech charges. This is where the failure of leadership lay. And this is why we had the Anti-Semitism Forum in March, so that everyone who attended signed the commitment for change, to work harder, to go deeper, and to make sure that enforcement tools are in place. And as I said earlier, I support the bubble legislation. I worked with Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism, the Justice Minister, so that Mark Carney did commit to that just over a week ago. He committed to increased penalties. He committed to bail reform. And this is all the work that we have done as Liberals to make sure that we know that we are keeping Canadians safe and Jewish Canadians safe. I've also committed just here tonight and in other conversations that the glorification of terror and the hate symbols that we see from terrorist organizations, what's in the criminal code should be in alignment with our terrorist listings in this country. And if we have to amend the criminal code to ensure that it's a crime to block access to schools and community centers, we will do it because the behavior is shameful. If it's a crime to intimidate or threaten those who attend services there, we will do it because it is not the Canada that we know and love. And we will make bail reform stricter because we know we have to. But I want to bring up the example of the Avenue Road bypass as a perfect example of what happens when federal counterparts work with their provincial and local counterparts. Marco Mendicino and I worked tirelessly with James Pasternak and Michael Kersner and others to ensure that those Avenue Road bypass protests would stop, because we knew they were a direct intimidation to the Jewish community. And that's why on January 11th, Chief MQ came out and said in 2024 and said they will stop, and they did. But my provincial counterpart doesn't know how to be a team player. He was kicked out of Doug Ford's caucus, and he doesn't have those relationships. He doesn't have them now, and he won't in the future. So how are you going to protect this community? That's
if we could.
No.
Thank you. Okay, now back to Mr. Weber for a minute of response.
Thank you. Not only will this Liberal government not stop the chaos, it is fueling the chaos with its actions at home and abroad, and the mass thugs on the street. With friends like this, who needs enemies? Okay, first of all, they have funded this vicious anti-Semite named Laif Marouf to combat anti-Semitism. Minister Hussein said he didn't know about it, but he was briefed about him. The Liberals appointed another vicious anti-Semite, Birju Datani, to chair the Human Rights Commission. He was forced to resign. They're fueling the actions of these thugs at home with our foreign policy. By voting against Israel at the UN, by betraying the state of Israel at the United Nations for the first time, they sent a message who they aligned with. After that, Canada was thanked by Hamas in a video. Yara's government was thanked, Canada was thanked by Hamas in a video. I would still like to talk about the funding of UNRWA, and I'd like to talk about this tweet that Yara put out about Canada supporting the study of whether Palestinian women are being subjected to sexual violence by the IDF to the tune of $1 million. Does she believe that the IDF perpetuates sexual violence against Palestinian women? And how is that not fueling anti-Semitism at home?
Thank you. Now we'll go over for a minute, or maybe even slightly more than a minute, to Ms. Sachs.
Thank you so much. And again, misinformation is abound here by the Conservative candidate, because he failed to mention that I actually advocated and supported $4 million in funding for Israeli organizations such as the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel to investigate the weaponization of sexual violence on October 7th. And that pledge has been implemented and has gone forward. And we actually just got the report from Israelis this past week in protecting and defending women. But the Conservative candidate seems to speak out of both sides of his mouth, because he talks about his outrage and upset about the protests here, yet he proudly stood with convoy protesters who took over Ottawa and upended the lives of local residents for weeks on end without permits. Their protest completely illegal, and stood with them while they wove swastikas. So, you know, we need to be clear here in understanding where his ideology lies and where it blurs into the lines if he wants to take a principled approach. He hardly seems principled to me. It seems more opportunistic than anything else.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the last of the 5 prepared questions, which is, if elected, What actions will you and your party take to implement and apply Canada's definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, across federal departments and agencies? And for this one, we'll go first to Ms. Sachs for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Aidan, for this question. And I know that particularly for this audience, the issues of anti-Semitism are front and center and a key issue in their voting choices in this consequential election. Let me be clear, anti-Semitism has no place in Canada, or frankly, anywhere for that matter. And this is a government that has made more investments to the Jewish community and Holocaust education than in any time in history, with over $200 million in the last decade. And these are projects and programs that CJA, UJA federations, and others have lauded the Liberal government for taking the time to invest in Jewish Canadians and Jewish communities. It was a Liberal government that formally adopted IHRA in 2019, and it was the first jurisdiction globally to lead the way in doing that. It was also the first jurisdiction globally to appoint a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and preserving Holocaust education under the auspices of Erwin Kotler. And I remember that day because it was my first day in the House of Commons after being elected in 2020. And that's exactly why within a month of being elected and coming into Parliament, I advocated for and delivered on the IHRA handbook, which was released this year, a government handbook to ensure that the definition of IHRA is enforced in every department, in every institution, every place, so that there is no gray area when it comes to anti-Semitism and the safety of the Jewish community. So attorney generals and prosecutors don't have to question whether or not it's a hate crime. But under this leadership, we've also ensured that federal programs and payments that are designed and delivered are managed with integrity, accountability, and transparency. He referred to Laith Marouf. This is exactly why the IHRA definition was in place, which is why the funds were taken back from that organization, and which is why all government contracts were revised to ensure that the definition of anti-Semitism and that no hate can be conducted under the auspices of a government program. But historically, let's talk about the Liberal record. This is the government that apologized for the turning away of the St. Louis to the Jewish community of Canada. And we also understood that as each year as survivors get fewer and fewer, that their stories, their legacy, and the lessons of the Holocaust and how to prevent hate and anti-Semitism in our communities become more important than ever, which is why we made historic investments in Toronto, Vancouver, and here in York Centre in Toronto to Holocaust museums to ensure that their stories are never forgotten and become an important tool in keeping Canadian society safe and free of hate. And I'll say this, our government put forward an online hate bill that the Conservatives had the opportunity to work with us on, but at every opportunity took points of privilege rather than protecting Canadians. They continue to historically politicize the Jewish community rather than protecting them. And even when they were in power, they didn't invest and they failed this community.
Thank you. And now over to Mr. Baber for 3 minutes.
You know, I actually worked on the IHRA definition as well. I helped negotiate the adoption of Ontario government's definition of the IHRA. And in fact, there are many leaders on this call that may recall that negotiation. I want to thank the former member here, Michael Levitt, who was very supportive and instrumental in that effort. There was a lot of resistance, especially to the illustrative examples, but we've succeeded. And by the way, it was a Conservative government which first adopted the IHRA definition as part of the Ottawa Protocol on combating anti-Semitism. I'd like to go back to Ms. Sachs. Yes, the Canadian government gave $1 million to understand sexual atrocities against Israeli women. And then, to be fair, it gave $1 million to study sexual atrocities against Palestinian women. So she is suggesting that there's a possibility that IDF soldiers are engaging in that kind of behavior. That's precisely what's fueling anti-Semitism, but not just that. Yara Sachs has done everything possible to undermine our community and the state of Israel at every turn. Never mind the picture. It's the fact that she voted with this Liberal government to sanction Israel while at war, to deny its military equipment when it's fighting on 7 fronts for its survival. That, I believe, is simply repugnant. She would have had the world deny Israel military equipment, leading to Israel leading the war, and therefore putting every Jewish person in the world at risk. The fact that she voted to sanction Israel at war can never be forgiven. Never mind the UNRWA funding. Never mind the pictures. Never mind the anti-Semites that her government loves. I would like to talk about Mark Carney. The very first check he wrote when he became prime minister was $100 million to the Palestinians in Gaza. Of course, it's going to be going to Hamas, prolong this war, and kill more Jews. 4 days ago, Mark Carney engaged in blood libel, suggesting that Israel is committing genocide. And of course, he tried to walk it back and say he didn't hear, and he only heard the word Gaza, even though the word Gaza was not mentioned. It was the word Palestine. Mark Carney is not strange to telling misinformation. And even though Mark Carney is walking back away from it, Adam van Koverden from Milton and probably 10 to 12 other MPs, liberal MPs, openly agree and accuse Israel of genocide. Accusing Israel of genocide is not just blood libel. It's not just putting Israel in danger. It puts Canadian Jews in danger. It has the effect of inciting against Canadian Jews. This liberal government is not just blind to this unprecedented anti-Semitism, it is fueling this anti-Semitism.
Thank you. We'll have a minute of response from Ms. Sachs.
Thank you. I believe the question was about IHRA, but I think we need to clear the record here a little bit. So the $1 million that was pledged towards Gaza women does not indicate anything except that we have heard allegations of sexual assault and violence within refugee camps within Gaza. Nowhere has there been an accusation that they have been perpetrated by the IDF. That is misinformation. And additional to the misinformation that Mr. Baber seems to run freely, the export permits to Israel through our export regime have continued to flow since October 7th for defensive materials. As a matter of fact, $65 million in business was just executed within the past few weeks for artillery propellant by Canadian businesses. Canadian policy has been clear. Israel has the right to defend itself. Hostages must be released. That is unequivocal. Hamas cannot rule Gaza, and there must be a ceasefire and humanitarian aid must flow. This is the Canadian position. This is Mark Carney's position. This is my position, and I will not tolerate it being misinterpreted or misinformed by anyone, including the Conservative candidates.
Okay, back to Mr. Baber for a minute.
Okay, well, I'd like to pose the following question to Yara Sachs. Her conservative counterpart, her colleagues, at least 2 colleagues in the Liberal caucus, have voted against the motion to sanction Israel at war. It was a weapons ban. And it's not as if Canada exports that much weaponry to Israel. In fact, it's the other way around. But the day after that Liberal motion, Italy passed a similar motion. And then other countries followed. In fact, Mark Carney was very proud of that weapons ban just a couple of days ago after he accused the state of Israel of genocide. You notice that the most common word that Yara Sachs uses is misinformation and disinformation. The greatest purveyor of misinformation and disinformation is this liberal government. I would never allow for my government to leave an ally in distress, an ally that's fighting for its survival for several fronts. And while other liberals voted against the motion to ban weapons to Israel, Yara Sachs voted in favor. We will always remember that vote, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you. So now we've reached the eagerly anticipated audience questions part of the evening. There are a lot of great questions out there. We're not going to get to all of them, of course, but in an effort to get to as many as possible, we're going to keep the candidate responses fairly short. So again, we'll alternate who goes first. First candidate will get 2 minutes. The second candidate will get 2 minutes for each of these questions. So the first one is, we have a somewhat interesting or almost unique situation in that both of you, Mr. Baber and Ms. Sachs, either do represent or have represented York Centre in elected office before. So the question from the audience is, and this will go first to Mr. Baber, is whether there's anything from your political career or your time in office so far that you regret.
Absolutely. I got into politics because I was blessed with considerable experience in the private sector. I litigated commercial insurance, bankruptcy disputes. I negotiated a lot of deals, and I have deposed a lot of witnesses, and I've been incredibly blessed. And I decided I'm going to bring a no-nonsense approach to government and break glass doors and when on reflection, when you get a little older, I was asked that question by an associate of mine not too long ago. And the one thing I would say is, I wish I was a little bit more diplomatic during my first term. Because in politics, unlike in business, sometimes people don't want to hear the truth. Sometimes they want to beat around the bush. And I've learned that. I'm certainly more seasoned going into what I hope to be my second run around. But that does not mean that I will ever compromise my principles. And, Ms. Sachs accuses me of being disingenuous or opportunist or self-interested. But if anything, my career indicates that I've always acted to my own detriment, just like I do on this question. I have nothing to hide. And I don't aim to be liked. I'm not looking for pictures. I want to try and improve this country. I want to make housing and life more affordable. I want to try and make sure that parents are not worried about kids going to school and worried about their safety on their way to Chad or another Jewish school, or their safety at public school. We always have something to learn. And I hope to enter my second endeavor representing the wonderful riding in New York Center. It's a little bit more seasoned and diplomatic.
Thank you. And now Ms. Sachs will have 2 minutes to answer that same question.
This is a terrific question to really start the conversation and getting to know the candidates a little bit deeper. And I know certainly for the Jewish community and many in York Center, I've been asked this many times, so I think this is a great time to actually answer the question if I regret going to Ramallah and meeting with Palestinian officials that day in March 2024 and taking part in those discussions. And what I'll say is what I regret is not having more conversations with the Jewish community when I got back from that trip to really unpack the trip in its entirety. It was an important 4 days where we went to Israel to stand in solidarity with Israelis, going to Kibbutz Kfar Aza and meeting Ayelet Epstein, who talked to us about her son Netta, who was killed on October 7th. Ayelet herself is an Israeli Canadian. Going to Sderot and meeting not just with members of the community from the Otif, but also northern community residents who had been displaced and really understanding their stories in this horrific war that Israel has had to endure now for 18 months on every front, and understanding firsthand from them their fear and their exhaustion in having to confront ongoing daily threats to their safety and stability. And we had important conversations with Israeli Foreign Minister at the time, Israel Katz, with Ron Dermer, the Strategic Affairs Minister, and also with so many officials at all levels that we could meet with while we were in Jerusalem. And we also took the time to go to Ramallah, as every minister does when they travel to the region, because these conversations are important. And I need to remind folks, Stephen Harper did this, John Baird did this, and others did this, because if we want a safe and secure Israel, which is truly, truly what we want, then we have to understand, just like Israelis do, that working with the Palestinian Authority is a key part of that. We may not like them, but as Yitzhak Rabin said, you don't make peace with your friends. You do the hard work in those rooms with the people you don't agree with.
Mahmoud Abbas is not interested in peace, and doesn't sound like you regret meeting with him at all. That was a roundabout way to rationalize what you did. He pays to kill Jews. He will keep.
I don't believe you have the floor now, Mr. Baber. Thank you.
That's fine.
Yar, if you want to respond for maybe just 10 seconds, it's Mr. Baber got in there for.
He's not interested in peace. He's interested in killing in as many Jews as possible.
Okay, do you want to respond to that, Ms. X? Just for 10, 15 seconds?
If Baber is willing to mute his mic from his exuberance, then sure.
Yeah, I think he'll let you answer. Go ahead.
It shouldn't be about let. I don't need his permission. I just want to make sure that he's respectful.
I'm confident we'll all be respectful. I mean, you can respond for 10, 15 seconds.
I'm happy to. We work as governments, we work with governments around the world. And Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak understood that when he met with Mahmoud Abbas on October 24th after the horrific attacks of October 7th. The same with the President of France, the same with Anthony Blinken and others, because hard work doesn't happen with people who you agree with. The hard work happens with those to ensure a safe and secure Israel, and Canada has a role in that.
You dislike your political opponents more than Mahmoud Abbas.
I know this is it's a hot, interesting topic. I just want to make sure we get on to more audience questions, but I do thank both the candidates for being very candid about that one. So the next question from the audience, and this will go to Ms. Sachs first, is if you're elected, what do you think this riding of York Centre will or should look like in 4 years? What ways might it be different from how it looks now?
That is such a great question and something that I'm really excited to talk about. First and foremost, it's housing. We recently announced over $365 million just at the corner of Wilson Heights and Wilson for 1,700 new units. And the potential at Downsview in the coming years and decades will be a critical part of how this community grows, and that we make sure that the services and housing and infrastructure are available to everyone who lives here, but everyone also who wants to live here, so that we have a community that's growing and thriving. Other investments, obviously continuing with work like the community infrastructure program and making sure that all of our places of worship, daycares, community centers continue to be safe. But I also hope in 4 years from now that the Jewish community doesn't feel like it needs to live in a silo, that we are working together with all levels of government and with all communities so that Jewish Canadians here in York Centre feel safe and secure no matter where they go. My daughter included, who goes to the local Jewish high school, my parents who live up the road and go to shul each week. This is our community, and it's one that we're so proud of, but tolerating the anti-Semitism that we've seen is just not a path forward. And that's why committing to bubble legislation and other pieces of the anti-Semitism forum that we've committed to as a government are the things that I plan to work on in the coming 4 years.
Thank you. Now over to Mr. Baber for 2 minutes. Oh, I think you're still muted. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Housing is a top priority in our country, as young people have to know that they'll be able to afford a home, to raise a family. It goes to optimism. It goes to their mental health. We are on the cusp of a remarkable project at Downsview Lands with 60,000 housing units, 45,000 job placements that will hopefully get going over the next couple of years. This will require serious work between all levels of government. I would point out that, for all the criticisms that my opponent has about myself, she was unable to work with any of our counterparts and specifically blames our city councillor, James Pasternak, whose endorsement I have, on what she calls the issues with Life Nation at Downsview Park. I'm going to work with Councillor Pasternak and all levels of government to get this project off the ground and to test a simple thesis, that if cities are interested in infrastructure money, they have to meet various housing targets. If cities are interested in development money, then they have to think about development charges, which are out of control here in Toronto. I have been to the Downsview site. I'm incredibly excited about it. This is a beautiful piece of land in the heart of York Centre that is going to be home to a vibrant community. And I can't wait to get shovels in the ground and to work with all levels of government to make these 60,000 homes, 45,000 job placements a reality. Some of you might know, I actually got into politics partially for my reason of loving mass transit, subway. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we look at additional ways to bring more transportation from Yonge Street to the Ellen Road? I can't wait to get going.
Thank you. So for the fourth audience question, we're going to turn back towards the Middle East for a moment because it's a topic that naturally many audience members are preoccupied with. As I think both of the candidates will know and many people on this debate will know, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, shamefully, regrettably, in the course of this war, issued arrest warrants for the Prime Minister of Israel and the then Defense Minister of Israel. The outgoing government and the outgoing Prime Minister indicated that if Canada was ever in a position to enforce those warrants, that Canada would in fact do so. Now, recently, there's been some indications that the ICC wants to expand its warrants against Israel, which could even lead to a situation, God forbid, where arrest warrants are issued against Israeli Canadians or Canadians who have been active in Israel. So the question for both of the candidates, and this one will go first to Mr. Baber, is what is your position? If applicable, what is your party's position on potential hypothetical arrest warrants against Israeli Canadians?
Absolutely not. First of all, Israel has never really attuned itself to the jurisdiction of the ICC. Israel has defended itself against a vague decision that has subsequently been misinterpreted, I believe, by the Justin Trudeau government. But think about the absurdity that we find ourselves in given this question. Ms. Sachs, again, justifies meeting with someone who paid for countless Jewish lives. He would pay the families of suicide bombers for killing and maiming Jews. But Justin Trudeau, her former employer, Prime Minister Trudeau was advised by Mark Carney, who accused Israel of genocide. I assume Mark Carney will support Justin's position on this, said that he would have to execute the arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Defense Minister. That means that if, in fact, we have a lot of constituents whose children have served in the IDF, if there is a warrant against them, and Liberal government was consistent on that policy, then they would execute those arrest warrants as well. It's bizarre. The fact that we do not have moral clarity from this government as to who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. The fact that we punish Israel for self-defense against monsters who hide behind civilians, under mosques, under hospitals, under schools. The fact that, she keeps on saying, oh, they have to release the hostages, but they won't. If they lay down their arms, if they release the hostages, this war would be over. But of course, the nonsense from the Liberals continue in appeasement of their political base. Something's not right here. Just like everything else is not right in Canada in the last few years. Absolutely under no circumstances should Canada enforce a single ICC warrant against any Israeli, whether it's a prime minister or a York Central constituent.
Thank you. Now over to Ms. Sachs for 2 minutes.
Thank you for the question. And I'll start by saying I don't live in the world of hypotheticals, just like I don't live in the world of misinformation and conspiracy theories. I deal with facts. And here are the facts as they stand today. Canada has been unequivocally clear on Israel's right to defend itself. Mark Carney has said that. He has also said in reference to the ICJ, as the Canada's position has been and continues to be, that we don't agree with the premise of the pleadings before the ICJ. We think they are wrong. And we understand that Israel has the right to defend itself in this horrific war after the attacks of October 7th. But there's a piece to this context that is really missing. And I really and truly feel that in the context of what I've heard from Israelis, my relatives included, that a public commission of inquiry in Israel, it's important to understand the levels of accountability that are related to October 7th. I know that this is a domestic question that's been asked time and again amongst Israelis. The Attorney General of Israel has tried to put one forward more than once. And I, like many members of the Jewish community here and Israeli Canadians who live here, listen and support what Israelis want and are asking for from their own government. And I think it is a domestic matter, a public commission of inquiry, but it's important for the broader world to see that a democratic, free country like Israel understands its role and its accountability in answering its own citizens to prevent such an atrocity from ever happening again. Canadian citizens expect that accountability from their governments here, and Israelis expect that accountability from their government there. This government in Canada stands clearly on the side of Israel. We have continued to allow arms exports to flow. We understand and demand for the need for hostages to be released, and that is the first and foremost priority in this war. And we also know, as I've said before, that Israel must be able to defend itself. That being said, we don't deal in hypotheticals, we deal in real world realities. And this conflict has been horrific for Israelis, and the humanitarian costs are just too high.
Okay, thanks. And then for the last audience question, we're going to turn once again a bit closer to home. Economically, these are, as the Chinese proverb says, interesting times. We have an unprecedented range of tariffs from south of the border that have an effect on the Canadian economy. Even before those tariffs, the cost of living, particularly in New York Center, has been increasing for many years and becoming less attainable for many people. So what will you and your party do to make sure that Canada not only remains a great place to live, but remains a place that people can actually afford to live in? And for this one, we'll go first to Ms. Sachs for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for that question. And on his first days in office as Prime Minister, actually on his first day, Mark Carney signed the order in council rescinding the consumer carbon tax. And we're seeing it at the pumps right away. Gas prices immediately dropped on April 1st by 20 cents a liter, so that there was a direct impact and sense of relief for many at the pump starting on April 1st. And it wasn't an April Fool's joke that day. But we know that we need to do more. We know that housing affordability has unaffordability has skyrocketed. And I will say this, my conservative counterpart, when he was an MPP, voted to get rid of rent control in Ontario, which is one of the key determinants of making sure that new Canadian families and low-income families, and even families who are just starting out in their first homes together, have that ability to save and put away. And he was part of that voting record to get rid of that key affordability piece when he was in the provincial legislature. But this is a government that understands that we need to do more. That's why we've announced a middle-class tax cut, because we know we need it. We know that we have to increase support to seniors at this time, particularly announcing a 5% increase to OAS and GIS. But there's other pieces to the puzzle. I'm proud to have worked on a national childcare plan that made sure that daycare didn't cost as much as your rent or your mortgage. And we're seeing the impacts now for families here in New York Center, from the JCC daycare over on the east side to Bladen daycare on the west. Pharmacare and dental care, key pieces of making sure that Canadians in New York Center are healthy and have preventative health care, whether it's diabetes medication or regular health checkups, dental health, oral hygiene checkups, so that they know that the key pieces of what makes life better, where the federal government can stand in, we have and will continue to do more.
Thank you. Now over to Mr. Baber for 2 minutes.
Earlier this morning, Mark Carney said that the carbon tax did nothing. So for 5 years, the Liberals have been gaslighting us about this, telling us that if we get rid of the consumer carbon tax, then the planet will burn. Now he withholds the consumer part, industrial will still remain, import tax will still remain, but they're pretending to do us a favor. They've finally withheld, they took away the abuse, and now they want to run a victory lap over it. It's shameful. Yara Sachs is doing everything possible to distract and to forget a decade of liberal mismanagement and hardship on Canadians. Pretend that it all didn't happen. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Food prices rose much faster in Canada than in the US, a difference of about 37%. House prices doubled in Canada, rising faster than any of our G7 friends. The worst growth in the G7 and one of the worst in the G20, with GDP per capita essentially unchanged over a course of a decade. In fact, in real terms, per capita, our economy has been shrinking. $500 billion of investment left to the United States, right? And all of this has been happening while Mark Carney has been advising Justin Trudeau since at least 2020. Now the same cabinet, the same Liberal MPs, and the same Liberal advisors are asking you for a fourth term. The people of York Centre cannot afford another term of the Liberals. But here's what I propose that we do. Here is what a Conservative government is going to do. The best thing is to become energy independent and to turn Canada into a natural resources superpower. Unleash oil and gas. produce and ship our own energy to new markets. We should be the wealthiest country in the world instead of relying on the US to refine and ship fuel to Ontario and Quebec. Oil and gas go to everything, to affordability, to standard of living, to trade and security. Mark Carney is a net zero carbon guy. He'll keep us dependent on the US. The Conservatives will unleash Canada's natural resources to make us independent, strong, and wealthy.
Thank you. So we've now come to the portion of the evening. I know there are some other great audience questions. We'll have to leave those perhaps for emails to the candidates' campaigns or for a future debate. We're now going to move to closing statements. Each of the candidates will have 3.5 minutes, and Ms. Sachs will be going first.
Thank you so much, Aidan. And I want to thank B'nai Brith and everyone who tuned in tonight for this important discussion. It's really been a wonderful hour with all of you as we wrap up. So to my constituents in York Centre, this is what I want to say. I believe in a Canada that is united. I believe in a Canada that is safe harbor and under stable and calm leadership in an uncertain world that we are in right now. And that is with Mark Carney and a Liberal government who will deliver for Canadians at this important time and in this consequential election. I believe in a Canada where our neighbors look out for one another and where small local businesses and large ones in our communities continue to thrive. Where we're a country with our robust, actually, we have more free trade agreements than any G7 member country at this time, that we harness that potential of the agreements that we've signed over the last decade, and really unleash our energy sector and all of our markets to the global markets that are really waiting for more of Canada to see from their grocery stores to their businesses and their high tech. I believe in a Canada where a woman's right to choose goes hands in hand with her healthcare, without excuses, without backdoor attempts to change the rules or reopen debates leadership debates, just as my Conservative candidate did when he contemplated reopening the debate on abortion, something that Stephen Harper said that debate was over. It's actually quite shameful. I believe in a Canada where every Canadian, regardless of faith, is free to gather and worship and feel safe in their communities and have the support of their neighbors and friends in times of need and in times of insecurity. And I believe in a Canada where I am living freely as an unapologetic Zionist. I believe in a Canada where my daughters are free to be openly Jewish, where they wear the Magen David and be their authentic Jewish selves no matter where they go, be it on the subway or over here at the Starbucks at Bathurst and Shepherd. But it's not as easy as changing laws with the snap of a finger or ignoring charter rights in the Constitution or to withhold funding and erode relationships with provinces and territories. Don't let the Conservatives fool you into false promises that it's that easy or to buy your sense of safety. Because leadership truly requires all of us to pull together in the same direction, and that takes hard work and meeting the moment and the challenges that we face, whether they're south of the border, in a world of uncertainty, or making sure that life here at home is stable and affordable, one where Canadians, young and old, see themselves truly reflected in the services that we deliver, and that they are all part of our united effort for the future that we're building together. Canada is the greatest country in the world because of our diversity and because of our openness and because we see the potential in everyone who chooses to make Canada home and to be a part of the fabric of our nation from coast to coast to coast. And it's anchored in our Canadian values. And as I said when I opened our conversation tonight, Canadian values are Jewish values. And I feel strongly about that because they're the values that I bring to my work every day, whether it has been in Israel or whether it has been here in Parliament, anchored in Derech Eretz and Klal Israel Arevim Ze Laze. We are all responsible for each other, especially as elected officials. And so for my daughters and for my community and for Canada, that is the work that we do each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll turn over to Mr. Baber for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Aidan. You know, the Liberals got nothing. They go to the abortion debate always. I've always been pro-choice. Because if I wasn't pro-choice, then you would know about it. Then I'd be open about it. I've always been clear about parliamentary democracy. I have a red from the Campaign Life Coalition, and that's not going to change. But I want to talk a little bit about what was said tonight and to thank all of you for giving us a little bit of your time. Look, at a time when there is such a deficit of trust in what politicians say, it's very simple. With me, what you see is what you get, because I'm known to speak my mind and to stand on principles. Now, you might not always agree with me. That's fine. That's democracy. But at the very least, you will always know where I stand. When it comes to working hard for my local constituents, as your MPP, I work day and night for every constituent, and I will do so again. I was able to bring back healthcare services to Branson Hospital with a reactivation site of 135 beds. That's how we kept the anchor tenant to keep the other healthcare services there. I took on Teske Concrete in Ancaster, where they had this legacy pile of concrete and no fence to prevent the smell and the dust. And I got the Ministry of the Environment on them. They built a fence, they cleaned up the pile, and I helped a lot of residents in Ancaster. On my first day on the job, Dangzhou residents in Ridge Park suffered a third flood. I got the province to expand provincial infrastructure and the water retention pond at Dangzhou Park. Now, none of this is really interesting, but you vest your trust in us, and I believe that I'm here to serve the public. Because government serves the people, not the other way around. You know, liberals believe that the privilege that people serve government. No, government serves the people. And with me, you will always be able to count on me returning your call and for good customer service. I came to York Center when I was 15, and I know every street, every building between Steeles and the 401. And I love this place so much because to my 15-year-old, Canada made a promise that I could go to school, that I could rise out of poverty, that I could start and grow a small business, that I would live in a world-class city and country, and that I'll get to be friends and share love with Canadians from all over the world. And as a Jew from the former Soviet Union, that I will ever have the privilege to represent my community and all communities in the legislature and, God willing, in Parliament is simply a dream come true. And I'm here to restore that Canadian dream for your children, so they are not denied that opportunity as they have been for the last decade. You know, fighting for the people of York Centre and having this relationship and the encouragement that I'm feeling from so many of you and so many constituents, I'm so incredibly grateful to you. It is an honor of a lifetime. And on April the 28th, I ask for your vote. I was proud to represent you at Queen's Park. I was proud to bring your voice to Queen's Park, and I would be honored to serve you in Ottawa. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. A huge thank you to both of our candidates today for a very spirited, candid, and impassioned debate. Back when we were doing these in person, this would be where I would have the candidates, come on stage and shake hands. Can't do it virtually, but I'm sure next time they see each other in person on the trail, that's what they'll do. I want to thank the members of the audience for being super engaged here tonight. Lots of great questions, lots of engagement. Let's keep that engagement going. Everyone who can do so, regardless of what riding you live in, should vote either on Election Day, April 28th, or at advance polls if that works better for you. And please make sure to tell your friends, relatives, etc., who live in Canada and are eligible to vote to do so as well. That's the lifeblood of our democracy. I want to thank the team here at B'nai Brith Canada once again for organizing. And I'm also told in a late-breaking development that there will be additional debates in other ridings in Canada. Details will be announced by B'nai Brith Canada. You can follow them on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest updates, or join their email list, another great way to stay connected. Chag Sameach to everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great night.
Thank you, and Chag Sameach.